Marcelo, how are you doing? Good to see you. Good. No, mix it up just a minute. That's it. Ready, button? You ready, button? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Anuszkiewicz. I'm the corporate secretary and board member for the Alliance. I won't talk to you about all the board stuff we do and all the corporate governance. Today, we're going to talk about, now that you've decided to do an LTE network, now that you have learned all the things and you're ready to run out and buy one of these networks from an OEM, how do you actually get there? What are the skill sets that you need to build this? After you've got it built, what are the experiences? So Tom, I'm going to start with you because you're from SouthernLinc. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, and then I'm going to ask you, I'm going to come back to you after introductions, and then I'm going to ask you, what's it been like to build and run one of these networks for, what, 7 years now? Tom?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Bettix. I manage our network operations team with SouthernLinc Wireless. Started with Southern Company when I was 10 years old, so I've got 30 years now with Southern, believe it or not. And been working throughout the telecom area within Southern for quite a while now. SouthernLinc, just to let you know a little bit about us, we've got over 1,300 cell sites in the traditional Southern Company footprint, which includes the state of Georgia for Georgia Power, the state of Alabama for Alabama Power, Southeast Mississippi with Mississippi Power, and Southern used to own Gulf Power, and we still have Gulf Power operations and supporting Gulf Power with NextEra also. So we support that Northwest Florida area. And anyway, glad to be here and look forward to talking to you about operations. I'll hand it over to Ron.
Hello, I'm Ron Brady, and one time I worked for Tom Bettix, so I must have been 5. I am a OT network architect for Xcel Energy. I've worked for several utility companies, and I've been in telecommunications for about 30 years, give or take. And LTE, IDEN, CDMA, all of those fun things. I've had experience. I also was the technical lead here for the Plugfest event. And I can tell you, as we get into this conversation, building it's easy. Running it is another thing entirely. So hopefully we can talk about that
Absolutely.
too.
Patrick?
Hi, Patrick Nolan from Ameren here. I've been in telecom for going on over 25 years at this point. In the wireless industry specifically for over 20 years, I have designed markets. I've probably touched about 70,000 cell sites between upgrades and builds. I've built NOCs. So definitely in my list when we start talking about
Yeah, Marcelo.
This is Mauricio Subieta from Nokia. I've been in the wireless industry for about 25 years and working also as part of a utility, Oklahoma Gas and Electric, for 10 years before I joined Nokia. Today, I work on the private wireless side of the house of Nokia. I am the energy CTO because of my background in utilities, as well as oil and gas and mining. Did a lot of oil and gas deployments in Oklahoma and Texas back in the day. I've driven to places in which you can see a jackrabbit this high. So, been there, done that. So thank you. Happy to be here.
Right. So I'll start with you, Tom. You've been operating this network when Ron was with you about 7 years. So what were the you had an IDEN network when you started, but what was the skill sets that you guys were lacking when you got started in this LTE journey? And how did you address those? But what was that journey all about?
Yeah, sure. So we were operating a IDEN network, which is the same technology. If you've heard of Nextel push-to-talk, we were running that. So it was a voice network, but also a narrowband data network. So mostly voice-centric. When Motorola ended support with IDEN, we knew we had to go in a new direction to offer communication. So LTE at the time seemed like the standard that the world was moving to, and certainly, obviously, now has been proliferated throughout the world, and it was a good choice. But we wanted to move to LTE for both voice, which is maybe a bit unique for us, both offering VoLTE services as well as push to talk, as well as fixed data. There was use cases starting to develop on wanting more and more data-centric applications within the utility, and those have just exploded within Southern. But some of the skill sets, I'd say, from a item perspective, it was a TDM network, so a lot of skill sets. I guess instead of using a T1 analyzer, being able to go to more of an IP-centric network. So building up skill sets within IP was probably a big deal. One of the things that we did was Southern Company's got quite a large security organization with that supports the cybersecurity efforts within Southern. So we really partnered with the security experts at Southern from day one with the different use cases we were looking at to make sure everything was secure, everything was built to the standards that they needed from a security perspective, and so that helped us not have to do a lot of rework and work hand in hand with the security folks from day one. And I would say now, although it wasn't an issue with us then, I mean, certainly now, if you're deploying an LTE network now, I think virtualization is certainly starting to proliferate, within the networks to save costs as well as support costs. So, having expertise within virtualization, I think, would be a good skill set to have, as that certainly seems to be the way that the LTE vendors are going to save costs and other things. And so that's probably a skill set that would be a good one to have.
Okay, great. So Ron, you've got some experience both with the SouthernLink, but where you are with Xcel. How are you taking the Xcel team now into beginning your journey into LTE? And what are you talking about? Workforce transformation, for example, skill sets, and what are you looking for? You look in terms of retraining your current staff, but also augmenting that current staff.
So I think when you're considering an LTE network, it's not just about building it. We've demonstrated you can really, just in this Plugfest, you can put an LTE network together relatively quickly, but it's a matter of running it. I think you have to take a really truthful, very honest look at the depth of your technicians and your technical staff. What does that technical bench look like? Can we provide all of the services needed? How much augmentation is there going to be? How long? Because there's a transitionary period that goes from build out to a run ready state. And if you only look at the build out, then you're going to stumble. You're absolutely going to stumble when you go into that operational mode. And the best way to do that is to have an operational plan right when you get started, and so that that those transitions are going to come and you choose when they happen.
So let's talk about that operational plan for a second. Can you give us, the audience, a framework of what that entails and what they should be thinking about? Because a lot of the utilities that are here today have not quite built their network out or even made the decision even where they are with the vendor. So what needs to be in that playbook? Okay,
so you need to kind of figure out what role your NOC is going to play. Most utilities have a network operations center that today currently watches their networks, but that's going to have to be a little deeper. It's going to have to be a little smarter. Maybe you need to consider a mobile switching office, kind of like what SouthernLink has used as a secondary maintenance and engineering aspect that handles all of the programming, the IP networking, those really deep details that it takes the guts of the system to run that. So those are things that you need to consider. You need to consider how you're going to manage those sites, especially if you have a large territory. That needs to be broken up and segmented in a way that it can be managed in a reasonable amount of time in terms of service level agreements. How quickly can a technician respond to an issue? Should you have some sort of catastrophe? How are you going to manage those workforces? How many of those guys do you need? How many do you have currently? There's a lot of questions. And another thing too is your relationships. You have to have a lot of relationships with your IT folks, relationships with consultants, relationships with commercial carriers, because every one of these sites requires wireline. We call it wireless, but they're all connected to a fiber or a cable in some way. So you really need to, your framework needs to have all these relationships identified, and they need to be cultivated in order to be successful.
Okay. So Patrick, you're fortunate enough to have come from the commercial carriers. Now you're on the power side of the business. What kind of lessons learned are you bringing to Ameren as you guys are standing up that? And then the second piece of that is, if you had to do it over again, what are the things that you would want to bring, especially as you're doing a new deployment, from your commercial experience?
For the second question, I have to say Ameren is very open-minded to hearing what those norms are in the wireless industry. And for the most part, I don't know that I would do any of it different, because it's kind of gone rather well in terms of absorbing those processes into the existing organization.
Okay. So can you touch on some of those processes and some of those norms from the wireless, the carrier world, excuse me?
Yeah.
To what another utility here might want to think about.
So utility companies are actually surprisingly similar to wireless companies. You have a lot of infrastructure strewn throughout your service footprint. You know how to build towers. Bringing in the operationally, you have NOC techs that need to understand how to interpret the alarms. You have field techs that need to go out there and be able to service the cell sites. You've got those windshield time issues, which you all are, I'm sure, very familiar with. You have the BTS engineers, which to a certain extent are an escalation point for the NOC techs. You have your core engineers who will handle your core. Within that, you've got different disciplines, MME, HSS, all those. On the engineering side, on the RAN side, you've got your RF design engineers and your performance engineers, which there is a fair amount of cross-pollination that they typically come in with. It's pretty easy to convert a performance engineer into a design engineer. So that's effectively your structure for your engineering and operations. The headcount that you need is a function of the size of your network. You can do a surprising amount of work with very few RF and performance engineers. They should easily be able to handle 300, 400 sites each, because they're designing. They're not going out to the sites very often. That is.
Okay.
Did I cover it?
A little bit, but let's go a little further, because this will take me to where I want to go with Mauricio. So what are those skill sets? You've identified RF design engineers, performance engineers. You've talked about a BTS engineer, and you've talked about some other people. What are the skill sets required for each one of those? And the second question is, how do you get those people trained if they don't have that training, or you did not hire them from the outside wireless world? Where do you get those?
Getting the training can be challenging. We're somewhat limited in our education options. For the most part, you're going to have to bring those skills in from the wireless industry. Our approach is to hire in those first positions, hire in from the wireless industry, take advantage of the training that the OEMs provide. The truth is, for the most part, definitely in our case, this is somewhat of a slow build. So you have a challenge in educating your current workforce, but then having them forget it, because when you've only got 10, 20, 30 sites up, they're going to see very few alarms. So by the time your network has built out enough that you're starting to see problems, they've probably forgotten the training. So our approach is to bring in the skill sets, get this expertise to develop our run books, to bring in that training and mentoring aspect to the rest of the team, so that as the workload slowly builds, there's someone they can go to and learn from. Combine that with the training at the appropriate time.
So Mauricio, you're a tier 1 OEM. So what is your view of what skill sets is needed if someone decides to buy a Nokia network? What skill sets do they need, day one, and most importantly, after they build the network and have to run it?
So I think we have to look at it from two different perspectives,
Okay.
right? As a tier 1, we can support the larger carriers from where Patrick comes in, where you have very specific roles that are going to have to meet very specific tasks. Say a BTS engineer, or you have to have a technician that's going to be dealing with HSS, for example. I'm not going to go there, because obviously the intent is to understand how you do that in a utility. From, like, I'm going to bring my experience, in which you had an engineer that had to know many things. One of the things that we had in OG&E, for example, when I was working there, was a network engineer who had to learn many different vendors' platforms. So we had Cisco, we had Palo Alto, we had other ones. We all had to be cross-trained on that. And I think that's part of what you see in utilities. In utilities, you're going to have certain roles, and I think that's probably going to change, as Pat's mentioning, because you're bringing new workforce to fill in the gaps of the skill sets that are actually needed now. But I think you will see a lot more people that are going to be trained into different aspects of it. And I think that for that, you have to be a mix of people coming in from the outside and the training that we can provide, focus specifically on what you're going to do. So, because there's a lot of things that happen within a utility that are not necessarily going to happen in a carrier or the other way around. Carriers have to deal with mobility, with a lot of other issues, charging, and other things that utilities, most right now, are focusing on fixed wireless access use cases. You don't see that much mobility, for example. And if you do, you're not really looking at the level of density or complexity that you would see in a carrier.
Right, but where does Nokia supply training, of which I know you guys do, but the net of the day is for the audience, how do these guys get these skill sets if they don't already have them, right? Especially because your platforms are all IP, which is what LTE is all about. And then how do you teach them the lessons that they need and certify them to work on your equipment? Because they're going to be flying that network after the build is over.
And I think that's a process of learning that's happening between utilities also as with us. We have classes and courses that focus on specific things. But at the end of the day, you know, as Patrick mentioned, you learn that stuff and you forget it because it's something that you see once and you're not using it every day. So starting from those lessons that we learn, we're starting to do customized training, bringing in, depending on what kind of audience is coming in with what skill sets, to tailor to what solution we really are providing from an end-to-end perspective.
So help me understand that. How do you do that with the utility?
We build up customized teaching programs. So
Right.
we now are building customized, as we build custom solutions for the utility, we build custom training for the utility.
Okay, so you go out, you interview that utility, you have a CIQ, et cetera, and then you figure out what skill sets are there, and then you do a cross map of what is needed, or do you do something else?
And that is correct. I mean, it's that interaction that we have with utilities, starting from the very early stages where we know what the use cases that they need are, and you start meeting people and you understand the skill sets that they have so that you can then properly provide a customized program. Obviously, we take a lot of feedback from the utility and say, what else would you like to have that? Because again, like you mentioned, it's an all IP network. It's just not the RAN or the core.
Right.
It's how you tie it all together and how you are going to end up monitoring. The alarms that Patrick was talking about, they don't just come in from the RAN. They come in from everywhere. So now you have to have this platform, for example, that provides that entire view of the network. Training may be provided for that as well now, which is not necessarily as obvious when you're deploying an LTE network. You're focused on the LTE only alarms. But when you see the alarm set coming in from other places,
Right.
then you have to provide that comprehensive training.
So Tom, help me understand this. For example, what do you have deployed other than a traditional mobile network? You have smart grid stuff and other stuff out there. How do you deal with those alarms, and how did you look at that in terms of skill training, but also training to your NOC people?
Yeah, and let me step back just 1 second and make a few comments. I've liked what Patrick and Mauricio said, just to add on to it though. But one of the things we did was brought in some contractors or SMEs to help with the core, to help with the RAN side, to really help train our workforce. So having expertise, whether it's brought in by contract to help supplement or hiring some folks, I said that was a big help. And you would think a lot of our telecom folks had been there for a lot longer, maybe 30 or 40 years. You'd think they'd be maybe not as eager to learn, but everybody really did embrace it at Link. We made a funny acronym. LTE was long time employment, so everybody knew they had to learn LTE, otherwise they'd have to maybe move on to something else. So people learned it. They did learn LTE. So that the SMEs was one thing. The other thing we did was our core and RAN was with Ericsson. We didn't just, although we hired them and used them to help build out our core, we worked hand in hand with them when it came to the build out. So we were looking at the MOPS. We were, reviewing with them, hey, here's what's going to be going on this day. And so our workers were working hand in hand with them. So they may not have been leading it, especially at first, but they were learning from the provider to learn more on how to, I guess, care for it ourselves after the fact. The reason we wanted to have our own LTE network was so that we could support it and own it and really run it to a utility grade perspective from a reliability, from an availability standpoint. So having that, ownership was important to us. So working with Ericsson early on was helpful. I agree with both comments about, training too early, because some of the training classes we did early, people forget it by the time you've got stuff implemented. So I think it's good to, maybe start off with some overview courses. We did a lot of overview courses with Ericsson early on, teaching folks kind of some overview things, but then supplementing that, we worked with actually a small company called RK Enterprises who did some specialized training for us on whether it's our network operations center on some, network management alarms and how to treat those from a RAM perspective, doing a better job of understanding the RAN side of things. So I think supplementing the training as you go is good versus, trying to do it all up front. Our folks are so eager for training, asking for training, but early on, but then they forget it by the time you've got things implemented. So it's good to kind of stage that. And I forgot the original question you just asked me. I apologize.
So you deploy, well, that's okay. That's because I wanted you to go on to that.
Yeah.
But also, you've got other things deployed, like smart grid. You've got other things. How did you set your knock up, or how did you guys start to think about that as you were setting your knock up to be able to look at that? Because like Mauricio said, you're getting an alarm from something way on the end that is completely different. And, I've talked to utilities and they keep talking to me about bringing everything into a single pane of glass. So how did you do that? Or have you completed doing that? And where are you in that journey?
We haven't. So part of it is we partner with our operating companies in terms of some of the end user equipment. So some of our fixed use devices, they actually, the end user actually monitors those versus Link, which we take care of the LTE network. So some of that have the actual end users monitoring more of their endpoint devices. From an LTE network perspective, we really had to customize a lot of our tools because a lot of the network management is really built more for, voice-centric things like VoLTE and mobility and things like that. We were talking earlier, had a discussion about our fixed devices, how, we use a DMVPN security tunnel between the end device and our core network. And that connectivity is always up. And so so it's always connected, always RRC connected. And so in terms of looking at statistics and alarms, that was a new thing at the time for, for monitoring tools and things, because it wasn't like your typical user out there that's, powering up their phone and making VoLTE calls or, getting on Netflix. It was a whole lot different. So we really had to customize a lot of our tools in terms of monitoring our devices, monitoring, making sure that they're up and running the way that we needed them to be. So we had to actually customize a lot of tools. NetScout was a big partner of ours on some of the monitoring too. So partnering with them in terms of, especially some of the, there's so much data that comes with LTE. So that was kind of new for us too, compared to IDEN. So being able to decipher some of the data sessions from end to end, and especially for troubleshooting with voice was a big deal. So having some partners like that to help with that certainly helped.
So Pat, is there best practices about what tools that you need as you're flying one of these networks, like NetScout or something else? And does that have to be customized away from the mobile networks, or are there off-the-shelf mobile network products that can be applied?
So I agree. To add more detail, an LTE network typically requires hundreds of thousands and millions of devices reporting their performance experience to paint that performance picture pixel by pixel so you can see that there are problems. So one of the topics my team wrestles with is, what are we going to do when, relative to commercial networks, we have very few devices? That picture is very vague. So on top of that, we're talking about very low downlink and mostly uplink, which is the exact opposite of what the carriers experience. So I'll add to the NetScout plug. I think we are going to be so blind relative to what I'm used to that we need the NetScouts. We need the true calls. We need everything we can find so that if we have to, at the device level, understand that device's performance so we can deal with any issues, because we're not going to have that picture painted by millions of devices in the network. So a lot of custom reporting will also come into
So if
play.
I could push on that for a second, Mauricio, if you could help us, what is out there in the ecosystem? Is there, for lack of a better term, a menu that you could go to, Patrick, to go find where those tools are? Like you mentioned, the Net Scouts, the True Calls, et cetera. That's part of that. But Mauricio, how do you as a vendor support your customers in terms of telling them what tools they need, but also what they need to look at for their network? Because I think Patrick's onto something and Tom, which is all of these devices are reporting, but they're reporting opposite of the way that you would do it in a normal, mobile network.
Oh, definitely. And I think it adds on to the complexity, because we're just talking about the connectivity on the devices perspective.
Right.
When you're talking about a monitoring tool, and I remember my days at OG&E, we actually had an integrated operations center in which we were collecting alarms and monitoring not just the networking side, but also the grid side. But we were also looking at what the consumers were looking at. And all of that tied to a GIS system, which really makes things even more complicated. So while there are tools, and like a vendor, we have been working on the tools focused on the utility market for a long time, especially from the IP and PLS perspective. And we're tying all of that story to the device connectivity. I think that there is a limit to which every single vendor is going to be able to provide some sort of visibility. Mm-hmm. I think that from a Nokia perspective, we have been working on that, especially, again, like I said, on the wide area networking side, tied to the LTE now, and stretching it all the way to the device. But looking at really what the utility needs to make sure that you have a comprehensive IOC, not even talking about a security operations center, which is also another dimension that now it becomes more prevalent and it's dominating a lot of the conversation on how really a utility is operating. I think it becomes a true discussion with the utility on how they want to handle that. And you have to bring the NetScout, you have to bring the other sets of tools that actually bring in that Splunks, for example, that bring that information, and they start correlating that to the level that every utility is going to customize to their own needs. Because that's the key. A lot of utilities want to see some portion more than others, and depends on how they operate and depends on what their strategic goals are. And that's how we're really working with them as a vendor of those tools to try to see how we can help them out. A manager of managers was one of the things that when I was part of the wide area networking discussions, a well-known tool, right? We were bringing forgot about Netcool, for example, was one of those platforms. We had IBM coming in, trying to set up other ones. But I think it's important to understand that while things keep on evolving, some of those tools are not necessarily meeting the requirements. So it becomes a really customized solution. But to the point that I was making earlier, every utility will have different requirements. They will have something that they really need to see. So solutions out there that you can say, oh, this is the right solution for you, are really tough to find.
So Ron, bringing you back in the conversation, you started talking about what you guys did at the NOC. So at Southern, do you have a NOC and a SOC when you were there, first of all? And then second of all, how did you integrate that into the existing utility NOCs that you guys had?
So yeah, we had a mobile switch office.
Just interrupt for a second. And then what tools did you have to bring into the toolbox?
In those days, there were not a lot of tools out there. A lot of the tools that were used in SouthernLink early on, they were customized tools. They were built in-house. We used the vendor platform tools with IDEN, and then we actually expanded on those, taking those flat files, customizing them to our needs so that we could get the specific information that we needed. What we discovered early on that was really important is you can have too much information to the point that it's unusable. It has to be parsed and classified, filtered in such a way that the information is usable and that it can be effective in terms of managing your network. A lot of information is good, but organized, categorized information is much better. And there's a lot of tools out there. Netcool was one that was mentioned. For Southern, it wasn't necessarily something that they needed to go to right away, simply because what they had was not only working well, they controlled it and their people were already trained on it.
Right.
As I later moved on to Duke Energy and some of the other utilities, it was a great option because it was canned. It was something that they could go out there and get, and it was focused on iDEN. Now that we look toward LTE, where we're looking toward a more network integrated platform, there's so many different tools out there. This is where we take a good, honest assessment. We look at our strengths as an industry, as a utility company. What are our strengths technically? Where are our weaknesses? We need to identify those and figure out how we're going to mitigate that. How can we turn this into an opportunity, and how can we play to our strengths in terms of network management and how we can best serve our customers? So there's a lot of choices out there, but it's going to take some really good investigation, some good, honest conversation, and leveraging those relationships and partnerships that we have with our vendors and with organizations like UBBA, where we can come together and we can talk to other utilities and try to make the best decision that we can, because you're not always going to make the right one right out of the gate. I think Tom can speak to that. Mauricio, I think you can speak to that too. Sometimes you do make the wrong decision, but you've got to be able to mitigate that and move quickly.
So how can we use UBBA as a platform, Ron, to do that? Because the wireless carriers, because of antitrust, are not allowed to talk to each other. And of course, they think each other are arch enemies, et cetera. Whereas the utility business isn't that way. What are the right platforms that need to be put in place to be able to transfer the learnings from the Southern companies of the world and Pat's experience and your experience into the newer utilities that are just stepping into this world?
So for utility companies, we work together because, first off, we have no choice. We have to, because we're integrated. Our service territories touch other territories. So as a part of this, I really don't think it's because we have to. We do have to work together. But the culture of utility companies is one that me helping you helps me, because I know that when I need you, you're going to come back here. So with events like Plugfest, it does provide a medium for us to network, to communicate, to integrate, to share our experiences, the success stories that we've had, the failures that we've had. Because, we're all friends and family here pretty much. Utility companies, we talk. We're a very close-knit group, and we tend to communicate with each other, leverage each other's strengths, learn from each other's weaknesses, and we're just pretty honest with each other. We don't have some of those antitrust issues that the big carriers have. We can walk through all that. We can get past all that. And the other thing, too, is that we're really good at is sharing process that works. How do we get past roadblocks? How do we get past some of the barriers from lack of knowledge, lack of information? We're pretty good at sharing this.
So what is your suggestion? And Pat, I'm going to come to you because you came out of the commercial business, of how UBBA needs to be structured to be able to support that vision. And what are the right platforms? Is that UBBA? Is that something else? Should UBBA do something different? And the Plugfest, should we have more Plugfest?
Absolutely, we should have more Plugfest. I think UBBA should integrate with Distributech as an organization, not just saying, "Oh yeah, we're at Distributech," but we should maybe carry Plugfest to the next step. Look at how it's grown.
What is that next step?
Okay, I think that next step would be UBBA setting up a demonstration within Distributech, and then possibly have an annual event, or maybe even less than that. Maybe it's a 6-month event, a Plugfest, where we continue with what we've accomplished here this week, and maybe we expand on that with integrating some newer technology, showing roadmaps from other vendors. I would like to see the vendors come in here and say, "This is our technology roadmap over the next 5 years. Is it right or wrong? What do the utility companies think about this roadmap?"
Perfect. Marcelo, how does that resonate with you, what Ron just said?
I think it's very important for us to hear and have that dialogue. I think that we as big companies, and this is a conversation I was having with Ron earlier today, sometimes have a focus on a different side of the house, right? We talked about tier one. So we're focused on certain markets. Like you said, very, very confidential, very challenging. Now, we look at utilities, and I come from a place where we actually used to talk a lot to vendors. So I think that this is the right platform and the right set of people that are together in which we can have that open conversation. I think that we really need to understand the needs, where utilities are going within the next 5 to 10 years, because that's what's going to define a lot of the roadmap features that are going to be prioritized within the big companies like us in order for us to make room, or at least try to, in a way, lobby internally to get those features. Because we are competitors here. I mean, we have more, in the Plugfest, we had 4 people that are going to be going at each other's throats when we are trying to look at a customer. However, it'll be important for us to understand really how we can really entice the utilities to look at us by having that roadmap, by discussing those features, right? And then we bring the best option to the market focused on those needs, and having a place where we can discuss this openly, have a nice conversation, not with one utility, but with many utilities,
Right.
and make it a more of a collaborative environment. I think UBBA is the exact platform to do it. And I think we had this discussion with other ones in the past, because this conversation, this UBBA event, really spans from a lot of conversations we had with utilities, a lot of conversations having between utilities, we being participating on that as facilitators, and I think we saw that need. So I think it's the right place to do it. I think it's the right time to do it. And I think that, like Ron said, we need to continue fostering this to make sure that everybody has a voice and we hear it.
So Pat, what do you think about that conversation that just occurred, and how can you fill in the blanks to that?
Yeah, so to sort of take this conversation down to something everyone can chew on.
Right.
Let's talk about the performance management. So the way Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei, pick one, they all work the same. They have counters. These counters are triggered when certain instances occur of a certain nature within the network. Those counters are used to be aggregated and then combined through formulas into KPIs. So it could be as simple as, and again, going back to, these networks are going to be different. We're going to be uplink. So we potentially will start developing some KPIs. We'll create our own. Ericsson and Nokia, they come with their own fleet of stock KPIs, and they're good, but I can tell you the carriers always tweak them. They come up with their own. We will absolutely come up with our own. So then we can share them. Look, this uplink-based performance, we just developed these KPIs that tell us this, this, and this seems to work for us. And so we can share that. Another area, CW testing. So Evergy's right next door to us. We're going to go do CW testing for our model tuning for when we're planning out the network. We have ATOL. If Evergy has ATOL, guys, we just drove this entire area. You're right next door. The morphology is the same. Here's our model configurations. I mean, there are a lot of ways that we can share information, but I think the performance management, considering this is really new, this uplink-centric network is somewhat new, that it absolutely would be of value as companies are identifying KPIs that are helping them identify issues in this environment, share them.
And it is up at that platform, number one. And
absolutely, it could be.
And the second part of that question is, what do we need to do next in Plugfest in your mind? Because you've seen this from the commercial network. What are the things that we need to bring to Plugfest?
Well, these kinds of events keep sharing and communicating. And as this industry evolves into this kind of a system, the conversations are going to evolve. The topics are going to mature. You're going to get more finite in specific areas. I saw it in SDN and NFV. I went to the initial SDN and NFV conferences, and it was mostly people wandering around, pontificating and speculating with nothing concrete. 5 years later, they've got details, like you're doing this, 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 this. This is all going to gel and come together. Conference after conference is what's going to happen.
Okay, absolutely. I was coming back to you, Tom. What do you think about the Plugfest that we've had? Number one, was that a value to SouthernLinc? Two, do you think we need to continue to have Plugfest? And what are the things that, as an organization, UBBA needs to bring to help folks understand what they need to do to run their network? And anything else you want to add?
And I'm honestly new to UBBA. I just started, I guess, this summer. I know Alan McIntyre in the back has been affiliated with UBBA a lot longer than I have, and could probably talk more a lot intelligently about it. But I've got, I guess, 3 things I think about. One is, from this event, I think it's important for the vendors to see the enthusiasm and utilities, all the use cases we're looking at. I think the more we can drive in terms of adoption, as well as implementation, the more we're going to be able to drop the costs for our UEs, our devices we use. I mean, that's a big deal. Having Nokia, Ericsson, others, hear about, hey, utilities are moving forward with LTE. They are focused on, the big money with the tier ones, of course, but, knowing how our utility use cases are different. I thought Patrick hit it right on the head in terms of how our traffic patterns are different from an RF perspective. So understanding the utility mindset, I think, is important. So the big vendors hearing about that is important. So I think that's what this conference kind of does from that perspective. We're here, SouthernLinc, because we want to see other utilities continue to adopt LTE and move forward with LTE. We think that just helps us for other utilities to be successful and move forward. We obviously want to continue to drive costs to the fixed devices that go out to the field. So helping other utilities, I think, as they're trying to make the decision, hey, this is scary, but you can do it. We're not any better than anyone else. We learned it on our own, and kind of through sweat and tears did it, and other utilities can do it too. I mean, it's a mountain, but you can get up that mountain, and there's help out there. We'll help you. And the other thing is really what Patrick just said is kind of best practices as utilities start to implement LTE. I would like to see this UBBA kind of be a best practices thing that could be shared between utilities, whether it be the KPIs that are used. Certainly we've had to learn how to customize those for our own needs from a utility perspective versus what the tier one carriers use. So I think things we can utilize that are unique for utilities, the utility mindset when it comes to reliability, redundancy, things that the tier one carriers are not doing. Sharing those best practices together as a UBBA platform, I think, could be very beneficial.
That's terrific, Tom. So we've just got a few more minutes left. We'd be happy to take some questions. Got one in the back.
Hello. My question is going to be for Tom. From your experience with SouthernLink LTE, did you notice that you started with certain thresholds for reliability, accessibility, retainability, and you noticed that was changing over time? How was the way you look at your network change and evolved as you deployed the network?
I'd say it has evolved. Certainly, with the implementation of the LTE network and as we constructed sites, a lot of optimization and, actually, finding issues that occurred during construction, getting all those fixed was a big deal. So, getting all that taken care of and, getting to the network to a standpoint where we were ready to put our commercial traffic on it. Our OpCo traffic is we actually operate commercially too, so I say commercial. But before we put all of our live traffic on that, kind of looking at those KPIs and parameters and making sure we were ready to add users was a big deal. We were one of the obviously early adopters, and so there was I think we've probably treaded a lot more new ground than we wanted to, but I feel like it's LTE's at a standpoint now. It's definitely ready for other utilities to come on board. I'm not sure. I mean, did I answer your question exactly? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, our reliability. That's a great question. So we built in a lot of extra redundancy into our network from a EPC standpoint. We've got 2 EPCs, so they're redundant. We've got big backup generators for both of our EPCs. We've got backup generation at each of our cell sites. So each LT site either has a fuel cell or a generator. And we've got redundant transport for most of our sites. So high reliability was a big deal. We probably started around the 99.93 reliability rate early on, and this year we're going to exceed 99.96. uptime. And so where it's really shown up is during storms and bad events when disasters come. Hurricane Ida is a recent example that impacted Louisiana as well as southeastern Mississippi. We don't operate in Louisiana, but we do operate in Mississippi. And in the counties we serve, compared to the tier ones, our availability, we did not have one outage during Hurricane Ida, where the reliability, you can get it from the FCC, of the tier ones in those same counties was in the, they had 18 to 28% outages within those counties where we had none. And that's not to say we're perfect, because we'll have outages too, but we have, just in our DNA of being a utility, when we have outages, we're out there safely, restoring quickly the communications, so our operating companies can communicate, whether it be to fixed devices or to mobile devices that they use for their push-to-talk. So reliability has been a big deal, and it's just been increasing every year. And our goal is to get to 99.99 to 4 nines from a tower perspective and corporate. The core has been extremely reliable. It's more of, do you have transport issues and other things that can happen with your cell site. So getting that more and more reliable has been a big help.
Sorry, just to add to that question, because that question opens up a topic that we could honestly talk about for an hour here. So an LTE network that is unloaded, for the most part, looks fantastic. It's unloaded. KPIs are going to be fantastic. However, you're going to go through an evolution that you're going to see through your KPIs, where at some point your network is going to start to load. And just statistically, because certain cells have so few devices, it doesn't take much to tank your KPIs. So you're going to go through this period where your stats look horrible, and it's just the pure math of the statistics of when you only have 5 devices and one of them is performing poorly, he's contributing to 20% of your stats. You're going to be down in the 80% level. To answer your question, you want to be floating, like you mentioned, north of 99% for retainability, for accessibility, to use some AT&T terms. It's not until your network is significantly loaded that you can really add meaning to those KPIs. So again, going back to this slow roll and being blind, it's going to be we're back in the 1990s on amps, where the phones are dumb and they're not reporting anything to us. So for us, to a large extent, we're going to be resorting to coverage drives to make sure our coverage is as we believe it is based on our tuned models. That and looking at the devices when they do get connected. But you're floating in that 99% range, but it's not quite meaningful what you're seeing in your KPIs until your network is loaded.
Okay. Last question. Any other questions? Yes, sir, Mr. Espeter.
Question for Tom. When you guys deployed VoLTE, you were pretty early on. The rest of the carrier space had circuit switch fallback to rest on. What did you learn doing that? And would you ever recommend utilities pursue advanced technologies and be first adopters, or would you hesitate to do that ever again?
We were one of the first adopters with not having circuit switch fallback, as well as some of the push-to-talk deployments we did. And honestly, there were some probably bumpy roads going towards both of those. I think being unique with no circuit switch fallback was new at the time. I think more of the issues we have just been with the early implementation of push-to-talk. That was back in 2018, trying to get that implemented, and we really had short time frames in order to get that up and running, and that we certainly learned a lot. And we're actually got another push-to-talk network actually running on our platform now today, and it's continuing on. So we've learned a lot. We worked on some new technologies like EMBMS, which is a way to under a single cell site, like at a plant, being able to utilize a whole lot less resources. So basically, I look at it kind of in a TDM perspective. Instead of using multiple talk channels at one time for a group call, just being able to use one talk channel from a a layman's TDM perspective is kind of an analogy to what EMBMS is. So we were early adopters at that too. So, kind of, we were, I think, the first carrier in the world to implement that from a push-to-talk perspective. So we learned a lot. I think some of it was out of just necessity and timeframes with some financial things we had with other networks we had to turn off. So we were under the gun to get implemented. I think if we could do it again, certainly having more time to implement those, but it's done now, and I don't think it would be something that a utility needs to be scared about in terms of now, since it's already been done.
Right. So we're out of time. I want to thank the panelists. All of you have been great contributors. We sincerely appreciate it. And if I could ask you to give our panelists a hand. Thank you.